That's a good start. Just get automatically docked. Hello and welcome to John, not Quincy, Adams, the podcast. Hello, Connor.
Hi, Johnny.
It's been a while. How you been?
It has been a while. I've been good. I've been hanging. Been hanging around doing similar types of things to what you've been doing.
I see you've got a haircut.
I did. I no longer have the ridiculous fro that I had. Now I got a relatively normal haircut.
That looks good. Where'd you go? Did you go to a barber shop?
Actually, I had a friend do it for a sketch that I was in, and then he came over and finished it off, and then you actually tightened it up a bit for me.
Yeah, and I heard that there was footage of you without a mask or something. They had to open a salon for you.
I mean, I was set up.
Oh, really?
I mean, I'm making sure that this is up on Twitch right now. I'm having a little trouble. Oh, here it is.
Checking Facebook. Okay, we're on YouTube. That's good.
We're on YouTube, and Twitch is up and running.
All right. Well, folks, today we're going to be talking about Jean Edon, as I call him, also known as John Adams, the second president of the United States and a founder, someone who was instrumental in pushing the colonists who called themselves patriots to organize against British rule, overthrow the king, and found an independent country on the continent of North America. John Adams has been one of the more forgotten founders. We all know George Washington. We all know Thomas Jefferson. We all know Alexander Hamilton. But few of us really go deep into John Adams. He's sort of a forgotten founder. So today we're going to be talking about John Adams. We're going to be talking about his presidency, his political outlook, his philosophy. And I think a lot of you are going to be really surprised to find that John Adams does not have as straightforward of a sort of democratic outlook as one would sort of automatically expect a founder to exhibit. And hopefully by the end of this program, you will come to the same conclusion that Connor and I came to, that democracy was not a given when the United States was founded. And no one encapsulates that skepticism with regards to democracy better among the founders, that is, than our second president and founder, Jean Edon. I can't John Adams. I like saying Jean Edon. I just imagine him as a Frenchman, but he was really more of a fan of England. But we'll get to that. Okay. So in order to begin our conversation today about democracy and John Adams, we wanted to start with a very open question. And it's a question that I will pose to you, Connor, as well as to the chat.
Okay.
What is democracy?
Oh, boy. Democracy is a form of government. I'm sorry, I just got called twice by my mother. I'm just making sure that no one's dying. Democracy is a form of government in which the people have I guess it depends on the type of democracy, but the people have a say in what's going on, not a single ruler. It's based off of the people in some fashion.
Right. Okay, so it's some kind of form of governance that asks rather than dictates, right? Usually we draw that distinction between democracies and dictatorships, right? Rather than dictating to people how it's going to be, we're going to ask people what they want, and then government's job will be to provide for those things.
Thank you for the hair compliment.
Yeah. Nice Hari. Okay, so democracy, is it Is the United States a democracy?
It's a type of democracy.
Go on.
It's a representative democracy in which we elect people to do all the democratic business for us, but not everyone has the same say, especially especially with the type of democracy that we have. Some people's say is more or less than others. Some people's vote, especially if you're like Wyoming or something like that, you have like almost double the say of someone in like California or New York.
Mm-hmm. So, but to say that a country is a democracy, it's kind of an oversimplification, isn't it?
Yeah. Quite an oversimplification.
Yeah.
Go ahead with that. I'm sorry. I got to finish this and just say stop contacting me.
So, the idea of democracy is basically like, we're going to ask you what you want, and then we're going to provide that. Now, that might be easy to do with a group of 3 people who share similar interests. Not as straightforward with a country, right? We can't just go out in the middle of the town square, stand on the highest building and shout, who wants a bowling alley on 3rd Street? Who wants a restaurant on Georgia Ave? Like, we have to create what to effectively gauge people's opinions and make decisions.
I mean, some sort of aristocracy of some sort. You have to have some
aristocracy.
Well, that's too far. It's too far. I'm sorry. You have to have some sort of representative democracy or representative government of some sort, because not everyone can do it. And a direct democracy isn't something that this country was set up on.
Right. So we need to elect people. We need to have institutions. We need to have laws. Now, for those of you who are getting frightened, who have seen my more left-wing commentary right now, I am speaking as a founder right now. I'm not saying my own opinion, but right. So we need institutions. We need to break up the decisions so that not everyone in the whole country is making every decision. It's impossible. Yeah. So we have to kind of delegate to some degree. And that's where representative democracy comes in, right? Okay, so it's interesting because here in the United States, democracy is this word that we just sort of automatically throw out there. We just say democracy, and instantly the majority of people like rush to our side and say, okay, whatever you're talking about is good because you're saying democracy. But is democracy automatically a good thing?
Automatically, I'd say no. I feel like anything isn't an automatic yes. That everything can be corrupted or made to an end that isn't as representative as it would like to be. And at the current end that we're at, we have sort of a ruling class of either you have a lot of money and a lot of connections, or you're one of the very few who somehow made it through, and you're like championing the story of anyone can be anything.
Yeah. So, just the raw idea of representation and democracy itself could be taken sort of without reference to whether it's good or bad. It could just be sort of said like, a democracy is when you ask people what they want and then you provide it. And is that necessarily a good way of setting up a country? And that was a real question that what we call the founders now faced. Because their first task as future Americans was not in their minds to build a democracy, to just sort of create a democracy. Their first task was to overthrow an empire, which they felt was overtaxing them and underrepresenting them.
Yeah, they wanted more representation. The most ironic part about this was they were so upset about how much they were being taxed and they didn't have a say in the taxes, but they were actually being taxed much less than those who were in the immediate reign of the crown. Americans, colonialists were taxed at a much lower rate, and not as much was taxed from them, but they don't like paying money to a government that they can't see, so they wanted to overthrow it. So it wasn't so much a big revolution as it was, we don't like these people telling us what to do. We just want to put our own people in charge, and that's pretty much what it was.
Right. And these feelings of desiring independence were really exacerbated by events, and most conspicuously the war that England fought against France on the American continent, which cost England quite a lot of money. And so England was like, hey, first of all, they used a lot of Americans to fight.
Well, they whatchamacallited them. They took us. What's it called when you take someone?
Press.
Thank you.
Yeah, they impressed us. They insisted on allowing British soldiers to be quartered in American homes. Now, these were colonists. These were British subjects at the time. So this was totally appropriate under British law. But after, I think it was 7 years, in fact, I believe it's called the 7 Years' War, if I'm not mistaken, Britain was like, hey, we spent a lot of money protecting you from the French and from the indigenous warriors who were fighting against you. You owe us. And so they started to tax. The Stamp Act was the first one to tax American citizens at a much higher rate to pay for this service that the British Empire was providing of protecting American colonists on the continent. And this was really, and this was really the first thing that kind of sparked this idea of, hey, you know what? We don't need this middleman, this empire here helping us out. We could actually strike out on our own. So well before anyone was talking about democracy and all this other kind of stuff as sort of like the automatic default thing that we were fighting for, we were fighting to overthrow a king and found an independent nation. And so the idea that the United States would be a democracy, or that at least the United States would value democracy as a high ideal toward which it ought to strive, this was not a given by any stretch of the imagination. It feels like a given today because of how our statesmen all talk about democracy, and they don't need to say, by the way, democracy is good, because people are automatically on that page, right? If you want to go invade another country, you just have to say it's in the name of democracy, and you'll have at least 50% of the country on your side.
Which we've done a bunch of times. Pretty much any time we've invaded a country.
Right. But we're taking all of you today back to an age well before that word democracy had that kind of currency. And today we're going to be talking about one of the founders who was very skeptical of democracy. And in fact, took a lot of
skeptical faith.
He was skeptical. He took a lot of actions that could be considered anti-democratic. And he said things that cast a pall of doubt on whether democracy was really a desirable form of government. Mm-hmm. In fact, to read you a quote to get started,
let's do it.
The man who we refer to, John Adams,
Jean
Adams, as we call him, once said, "There was never a democracy yet that did not commit suicide."
Not wrong.
So in this age when pundits, politicians, and observers are calling the current state of affairs the end of democracy, let us today go back and spend some time with our second president, John Adams, and find out what was the United States' view of democracy. What is the United States a democracy? Was it meant to be a democracy from the start, or was that something that sort of picked up steam along the way? And what did John Adams want the country to be? I can tell you, spoiler, we don't live in the country that John Adams envisioned.
Certainly not. He would be not only very confused, but he wouldn't have really a place in today's world. He barely had a place then as a politician. He, as we will talk about as we'll go through, is not really that great a politician. He's a smart guy and he's got a lot of great ideas, but he's really, really not politically savvy.
Yeah, absolutely. So without further ado, today we present to you a discourse on John Adams, Adams versus Democracy. So let's begin. Connor, can you tell us some of your sort of just general impressions of John Adams?
Yeah.
What you thought of him? So
he is one of our founding fathers. We already talked about Thomas Jefferson a little while ago, a few weeks ago. Everyone knows some stuff about George Washington, but maybe we don't all know as much as we'd like. We know some things about about Alexander Hamilton. We know some stuff about James Madison, but we know very little as a country about John Adams. As we said earlier, he doesn't have a statue. He doesn't really have a lot of things that indicate that he was as big of a deal as Thomas Jefferson was or Washington was, but he was literally just as important as them. Maybe he only had one term, but he was quite instrumental. So my first reaction, honestly, out of all the presidents that I've panned, I like where he's going a lot of the time. He's definitely made some mistakes. We will absolutely talk about those, but I think that he is, as David McCullough would say, one of the most human founding fathers that we have. You can see a lot of yourself, or I could see at least a lot of myself and my own rationale in why he wanted to do things. Listen, he's kind of a dick. He's not politically savvy in that he doesn't understand how to talk to people. There was a quote that was saying, that he was happy, persuasive, angry. He was everything that there was to the wrong people at the wrong time. He was never joking around to the person he should be joking around with. He was never cold and quiet to the people that he should be more reserved and listen more. He talked a lot. He yelled a lot. He had a lot of opinions, and he kind of fell into politics because of the very first case that he did when he defended British soldiers at the thing that pretty much spurs the Battle of Lexington and Concord. So, a few weeks later. But my first impressions of him is that he had he's well learned. His wife is Abigail Adams is probably the greatest first lady of all time. Certainly one of the most intelligent first ladies we've ever had. Very influential, and I think that at the end of the day, he is well undervalued, underappreciated, and I think he's decent.
So, Connor, you'll be representing the Adamsian tendency. Personally, I'm a bit more of a Jeffersonian. I like it. I like things loose and fancy free. I like a little bit of the populist touch. I think that Adams was a bit of a snob, which is interesting because he was a
snob for sure,
less wealthy than the other politicians who we've talked about, Thomas Jefferson, George Washington. He had a lot less money. He did not own slaves, a fact which he never failed to mention as a point of personal pride.
But to argue, I think that that's important. I think that that's something to brag about. Every other founding father, every other person of that time period who is worth a shit was someone who needed to be on the back of other people's labor in order to get where they were. And he did it only on the back of one other person, who was Abigail Adams, because she was smarter and better than he was and gave him a lot of things to art. He didn't always follow what she said, but it was pretty much just the Adams team. And he was able to go from just being a lawyer, whereas many of the founding fathers are lawyers and politicians or owners of this or that. The Adams ran their own farm. They made their own clothes. They homeschooled their kids, I believe, but I might have just made that up.
No, Abigail taught the kids at home. Yeah,
that's what I thought. So, he represents, he's not just Thomas Jefferson where he's like, I don't like slavery and own 600 slaves and be like, oh, well, you know, we should make sure that the executive power has checks and balances, and then like purchases a whole thing of land and impresses sort of, or just invades, you know, some of the island nations around us and Mexico to some degree. He did what he said, kind of, in that he lived the way that he believes others should live. He's not overindulgent, and I think he lived that kind of life.
I kind of feel that Adams is one of those presidents who, it's like, when you think about his mentality,
yeah,
you're like, that would be the best president you could imagine. But that's not always how it works out, because presidents like that, and John Adams, Jimmy Carter, I think of, tend to be very, they're not very flexible. And
his rotundity wasn't very flexible.
He definitely was not physically flexible, but he wasn't politically flexible. And in some cases that worked out really well. And in other cases, you just sort of look at him and you go, you know, why can't you see that the world has changed and it's time to adjust to that change? And, you know, in a lot of ways, I think of our era now, when I think of Adams, I think I often compare him to Hillary Clinton. You know, when Donald Trump came up and, you know, was running for president, a lot of people were just like, oh my God, like this man, he should never be president, and thought that that was enough to stop him. That just appealing to this idea that he's just such a terrible, gross man, which I think he is. But still, people like Adams, people like Hillary, you know, thought that they could appeal to this like sort of general idea of like being a good person, when the world had changed and the world was going towards Jefferson in Adams' case. And then in Hillary's case, the world was going towards Trump.
But let's talk about that for a quick second. I think that Hillary, I'm sure a lot of people think this, was way more qualified. I don't even think it's a matter of opinion. She is more qualified and was more qualified than Trump at the time. And a lot of people have a lot of feelings on Trump. We've obviously talked about it many times personally, but he's fucked up a lot of the things that people were like, hey, he's going to do, like, things will go crazy under him. We will have, like, if anything goes wrong, it'll blow up under him. He will, you know, be beholden to another country. He will be unable to manage in a moment of crisis. He will constantly fuck up with each and every, and her emails. But each and every time he was able to do something.
Emails were not great. Just
he constantly takes from the environment. He constantly takes from people's liberties. The important thing is that in this statement about Adams and Hillary Clinton is that they are better than their opponents and better than a lot of people at time, and are just assholes. And I think it's okay to be an asshole and to be kind of not good at navigating this world if you put the time and effort into showing what you believe in and how you believe in that. And, you know, generations later, people can look at it and be like, this guy's not a bad guy. He's a socially inept.
It's great. It's great to not be viewed as a bad guy from the lens of history, but when you're living in your own age, you have to get shit done. And you know, Adams may have had the confidence of feeling like history might have been on his side ultimately, but he was a 4-term president. Jefferson had 8 years, and
4-year president.
What did I say?
You said a 4-term president.
Sorry, 4-year, a 1.
Me and FDR, the only 4-term president.
You know, and I just think that you know, there were a lot of times when Adams was so convinced that he was on the right side of history that he made decisions that stifled open democracy. And it's no surprise, because Adams, as we were about to talk about, lived in a time when you could express skepticism about democracy, and it wasn't considered anti-American because the United States had not yet been established as a democracy.
But let's also, and obviously we'll be talking about this later with a few clips, especially a great clip from Obama, but most presidents find a way to abuse their executive power and not be a democracy. The way that the presidency is used in our country is kind of at the whim of the president. Many of them abuse their power, and I would be hard pressed to say that Adams did it more so than anyone else, or did it more egregiously than everyone else. And I will agree with the latest comment. Jefferson does suck. I found him interesting, but of the two, because you have Jefferson versus Adams, absolutely in the beginning, figuring out the ways to make this country together. If you're generally either a Jeffersonian or an Adamsonian, alimony. I'm on the side of Adams.
Woo! Jefferson sucks. I agree, but I am more Jeffersonian than Adamsian. But that's not. I'm not trying to be a Jefferson partisan. Which we're going to talk about partisanship. Partisanship comes into its own during the Adams years. But let's begin before we get into Adams' presidency, because I think the thing is, the reason why we started this Presidents Suck podcast is because we wanted to talk about the presidencies. It's interesting to go into the psychology or the philosophy of these characters, but they don't really mean as much until you look at what they actually did as president, right? So Jeffersonianism is not necessarily a reflection of the decisions that Jefferson made, just as Trumpism is not a reflection of how Trump has governed, right?
No, everyone knows that Trumpism is when you...
We're not getting much protectionism. We're still getting free trade, So we're going to start, though, by going through Adams' philosophy on government, on democracy, and then we're going to take a look at how he actually implemented.
Well, if we're going to talk about his thoughts, do we want to physically talk about his thoughts on government right now?
Yes, let's physically talk about his thoughts on government. Do you have that readily available?
Yes, I do. So basically, before Adams was doing, was the man that he was before, I believe we were even declared our independence. It was in his thoughts on government was in 1776. I don't exactly know the month, but I believe it was before we declared independence.
It was the spring. It was the spring of 1776, I think.
There we go.
It was it was something he wrote to advise the state of Massachusetts on writing a state government, but it ended up being very influential on the actual Constitution.
Yeah. And that's another thing about Adams. You're going to find that a lot of the things that he wrote early on are very influential on other things that he's done. We'll talk about the Massachusetts Constitution, and we're going to talk about his thoughts on government. Now, there's a famous quote from Alexander Pope, not Pope. He says, "For forms of government, let fools contest. Whatever is the best administered is the best." And Adams believed that this was a cop-out. He said we ought to consider what is the end of government before we determine what is the best form. Upon this point, all speculative politics will agree the happiness of society is the end of government, as all divines and moral philosophers will agree that the happiness of the individual is the end of man. From this principle, it will follow that the form of government which communicates ease, comfort, security, or in one word, happiness, to the greatest number of persons and in the greatest degree is the best. So what he's saying is, does it work for the people? Is it good for you? Is it not is it easiest for the government, the tyrant of the time, which is what his argument against Alexander Pope's was. Yes, a great thing from Kwaku, from Philadelphia. What's up, Kwaku? He was saying that the answer is a cop-out because it gives the ability of tyrants or anyone who's abusing their power to say, well, the ends justify the means. And that's not what he's saying. He's saying it's about the people. It matters who the people are, and that's informed actually by something that Abigail had written, John, a little bit earlier. Let me see if I can get that quickly. Here we go. May 7th of 1776, the same year that he wrote this, he wrote, "A people may let a king fall, yet still remain a people. But if a king lets his people slip from him,
he is no longer a king. That's a letter from Abigail to John. And I believe that that is directly influential for what he was saying there, that you can't, the benefit of the doubt doesn't go to the government. It's the mass of people that matter more than anything else. Who cares how easy it was? Yes.
But does the idea that a government should provide for the happiness of people automatically mean that government has to be a democracy?
No, it doesn't. And the phrase "the government should provide for the happiness of people" is kind of lame. It's something where you can apply it to almost anything and say, well, you're happier now, or this is better and you should be happier, or that. There's many ways that you could take that and skew it and make it more beneficial for you. But I think as, Adams's document goes along, and as he goes along as a politician, he shows that he's more in touch than that. Another quote he has is, the noblest principles and most generous affections in our nature then have the fairest chance to support the noblest and most generous models of government. And I believe that's true as well. He was he was progressive. He was very pro-education. And he truly believed that in order to make the society that we are trying to make, or a new society that would be better than the one that England had done, which is pretty much be the highest imperial power and impose your will on everyone else. And all your things will be cheap and free and easy because you will. And I don't know if you all have noticed this, but that's basically what America's been doing for the past several decades, 5, 6, 7 decades at this point. We've been impressing a lot of people. We've been taking over a lot of people and making our lives easier because their labor and their lives we can buy pretty much. And that's something that Adams knew early on.
But what's interesting is that Adams says the noblest principles our noblest principles can be brought out by the most generous forms of government. But again, we don't see him here saying that, and the way that we do that is by allowing people to vote on things. We don't see the word vote anywhere. We don't see representation. What is, to Adams, the key to having the best form of government that ensures the happiness of the most amount of people? What is it?
So that would be actually the next paragraph that he goes to decide. So these are obviously not, these are some paragraphs that I picked out from his speech. You can look it up. It's called Thoughts on Government. There's hundreds of different versions on YouTube, and it's really insightful and really interesting to know that one of our founding fathers wasn't really interested in the type of democracy that we have now. But I'll read this. As good government is an empire of laws, how shall your laws be made? In a large society inhabiting an extensive country, it is impossible that the whole should assemble to make laws. The first necessary step then is to depute power from the many, the people, to the few of the most wise and good. But by what rules shall you choose your representatives? Agree upon the number and the qualifications of persons who shall have the benefit of choosing or annex this privilege to the inhabitants of a certain extent of ground. So what he's saying there is, I'm smarter than most of the rest of you, so I trust myself more than the sheeple that are out there doing fuck all with their lives. And Adams truly was, he was
terrible.
He was an exceptionalist. He believed that he was better than others. And guess what? He fucking was at the time. He made himself who he was without slavery. And I genuinely think that that's a really, really big idea. Not a big idea, a really big deal.
Hey, Dorian.
And yeah, it's so he,
yeah,
what he goes like an aristocracy or a meritocracy. And I believe you have some thoughts on that, Johnny.
Well, one of the big problems with Adams in terms of and actually if you read what is it, Prejudential, they talk about how Adams very often bragged about not owning slaves, which
isn't that a big deal?
It's not something, but it's the point of not owning slaves should be because you shouldn't own human beings. It shouldn't be as to brag about your own rags to riches bootstrap story.
I understand, but he came up in the same way as Lincoln. He grew up in that same sort of
absolutely, I agree.
environment.
And slavery too.
But also, don't forget that not only is history written by the winners, but Adams was never liked. That goes along with the fact that John Quincy is ridiculed and not treated the way by history he should be. And the whole Adams family being pompous and not pretending, but believing that they're better than others is what leads to him being, I believe, shown in this kind of a light. I believe that he definitely said, I'm better than Hamilton because I don't have slaves. I'm better than Jefferson because I don't have slaves. But I think that he was lampooned by his detractors.
No, I get you. Hamilton did not own slaves, but yes, I get you.
He didn't? My bad. He was just Hamilton's a really shitty dude. We'll talk about it.
Didn't you see the musical, which was so inaccurate, but yes.
Yeah. We'll talk about this soon. Hamilton is a dog shit human being.
Okay.
One of the worst.
Yes. So, slander, we might have to prosecute you under the Alien Sedition Acts, but we'll get to those. Adams truly believes that the key to having a government that provides for the happiness, and honestly, you could say that this is the mission of not just representative Republicans, but it's the mission of it's supposed to be the mission of capitalism. It's the mission of communism, to create a system that ensures the most happiness. Yeah. But for Adams, that does not automatically translate to how do we get more people to vote, to participate in civic life. It's how do we create more institutions and laws that work in order to have a system. It's almost like a precursor to technocracy, where you create a system that runs itself. Yeah, a system that essentially runs itself, as long as you're educating people.
Yeah,
as long as you're about that. To keep people educated so that you have the experts to run your technocracy. It works.
Well, one of the reasons why, so the next paragraph down kind of talks about that. I'm sure a bunch of you have, seen it or read it at this point, but he understood that even if it's a democracy at a time or in a way, it can be corrupted just as anything else. He points to Holland in this passage because Holland decided, they went from, so first the assembly voted themselves every year. So every year they would have elections. Then it was septennial, and then it was for life. And then after that, vacancies were filled by the parties themselves without the people voting for it. So what he's saying is, the people got complacent because they had good representatives, and they allowed it to go from annual to septennial. And then they allowed it to go for life because they're like, wow, well, everyone's doing great and everyone's been great. And before you go, I can't believe they'd rule for life. Our judges rule for life. People in their 80s and 90s make decisions on what's going on now. And exactly what Kellen is saying right now. We have our best option for president right now is Joe fucking Biden. He's old as shit. Elizabeth Warren, old as shit. Bernie Sanders, old as shit. Pelosi, not a presidential candidate, but someone who is cemented into the establishment. Chuck Schumer, old as shit. All they do is allow, or they try and get more money and get more influence.
Chicken.
What'd you say?
Whereas Trump is young as hell and he's a spring chicken. But
Republicans do the same thing. I was just going after.
We've got like a lot of people at the end of their journey running our country right now, which is interesting.
Yeah. The end of their journey is a good way to put it.
So the things that really matter to Adams more than anything else. So what's interesting is Adams, he has a lot of observations about human nature, and he really, as much as he's born in a time when actually Abigail says this to John Quincy when he's a young man,
a young lad.
This is a wonderful age to be a genius.
Yes.
It was a time when people who had great ideas about new ways of governing could be heard. And from in that environment, we got Adams, we got crazy ass Hamilton, we got even crazier ass Aaron Burr, we got Thomas Jefferson. You know, we got all these people who had these very, you know, these extremely new ways of thinking about governance. And for Adams, you know, he sees government as this thing that, like, it can only work if you find ways to really cultivate the individual, you know, if you find a way to cultivate the individual, if you can educate, if you can have, you know, strong laws and institutions that are, you know, easy to understand at least, or like that one can be educated to understand, that won't change, then you can have a strong working system. And the thing is, that sounds really good on paper, but what I like about Jefferson more is that Jefferson anticipates the chaos. He anticipates the fact that even if you try to cultivate people, and even if you try to build like FDR, right? We can look at FDR and go, FDR did the right thing, but what happened to FDR's system? Over time, it fell apart.
And over time, you just end up imprisoning a type of human being in camps.
Right, which is why Jefferson had a different view of, hey, if we have a democracy, we can let people sort of challenge what's going on and change it. Now, that's not a perfect solution either, but it seems like one that's more realistic to me.
Diane has a really good question, or a good prompt, I guess. And, you know, Hobbes was a really, really important person. Actually, in this treatise, in the Thoughts on Government that Adams has, he actually lists Hobbes as a political mind of the time and someone to pay attention to. And Hobbes has a lot of good ideas. He has a lot of really important things to say about what government can lead to and what government is. And this, on paper, is a good point that someone who's doing a job for longer probably has more experience and a better understanding of that job. But one of the biggest problems in America, especially with American politics, is the power grab that you get from being in office for so long. You've done so many deals with so many different people, and you've bowed to some shitty people and gotten shit from other, you know, maybe good people, but generally good people don't have money because money is made by those who step on others. So a lot of the times those who've had the experience are those who are trying to keep their experience and who are rather corrupt.
I just kind of, but I just sort of think that, like, what ends up happening to people like Adams in the real world is that they cling so hard to this idea that the world should be a certain way, that when it's not the way they wish it was, they don't have like a contingency for it. And I think Jefferson's answer to that question was not a great answer either. It was just sort of like, it's the answer the Republicans give us. Go fuck yourself. You know what I mean? Like, let it ride. But in an intrinsic level, there's something in that I identify with, because you can't cultivate a society of institutions that will last. You have to be able to change. And the best agent of change
revolution every so often.
And the best agent of change are the people. So in that regard, I fall more on the side of Jefferson, not because I agree with Jefferson in terms of like how this is how it should be, but because I look around in the world that I live in, and it seems to suggest that that's how it is. That's not perfect either. That's a strange thing for a lefty like me to say, but everybody on every side of the political equation claims Jefferson. So I don't feel too much of an identity crisis saying that. Now, okay, so we've got a sense of what John Adams believes.
Yeah.
Well, I want to go through really quickly John Adams's sort of trajectory, his career trajectory, because you got to know why should we give a shit what he thinks? It's
Where did he come from?
Yeah.
If he's such a bad politician, how did he become president and the first vice president? Well, we're going to tell you.
So, he wasn't so bad of a politician. It's just that you compare him to other of his contemporaries, and he seems to have been less successful than others. But
Not
on the whole, he's pretty successful. He was he first kind of like burst onto the scene as the lawyer who defended the British soldiers who shot into a crowd of patriot rabble rousers in Boston.
Weren't a few kids in that? Weren't there children in that?
There were underage people. Of course, children is a very loose word in 1776. There wasn't really, child. Sorry to do it aside, but I was watching a debate I was watching an old debate, presidential debate, Bill Clinton, George Bush, and Ross Perot. Oh. And this woman asks a question. She goes, when the founders wrote the Second Amendment, they didn't mean for 12-year-olds to have guns. And I was like, yeah, they did. The point was that you give your 12-year-old a gun so you go hunt. Like, yeah, of course they meant for 12-year-olds.
Were like men back then.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't think they maybe meant for a 12-year-old to have a semi-automatic, whatever, AK-47 to bring into a market. But like they very specifically meant for children. They were fine with children having guns. So we're not talking. Anyway, that's as an aside. The point is, so I mean, imagine an analogous story like today. A group of Black Lives Matter protesters hit the streets. They confront a series of cops. They're shouting, no peace, no justice. Somebody from the crowd apparently throws a snowball or something at the cops, and the cops start firing. I mean, we don't have to imagine it. We can just go on Twitter and we can find hundreds of videos of cops beating up protesters every single day. Well, the Boston Massacre was a similar event. You had these people who were protesting against British soldiers, and the British soldiers got spooked. They also felt rather empowered as British soldiers, and they shot. And they killed a bunch of people. And John Adams, as a lawyer, he represented the British soldiers because he felt that, again, law is the most important thing. If you don't have functioning laws, and if you don't have a society that follows those laws, you don't have a society. And he really got a lot of flack for defending those British soldiers. But that was really what launched him into the main scene. Now, he also had a cousin who was a big patriot and pro-America guy, Samuel Adams, if you're familiar with the beer. John Adams, he was like the more moderate version of his cousin, but his cousin kind of pushed him a little bit. And yes, Dorian Sapiens, those soldiers did get acquitted. Yes. Most of them did. I think one of them did end up going to jail, but most of them did get acquitted.
It earned Adams quite a reputation, and he assumed it would be the end of his career, being that he sided with the UK, the English at the time, but it actually brought him into prominence.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about this HBO show. Don't worry.
Paul Giamatti as John Adams.
Yeah. So
it's a good show.
Then, here's the thing. Because he defended the British soldiers, when he came out as a patriot, it was even bigger. It was kind of like, it was like John Kasich coming out and being, against Trump. It was like standing at a crossroads against Trump. It was the bombshell. Oh my God! Did you guys hear that Christine Todd Whitman doesn't support Trump? He's toast. John Kasich. I mean, come on. Jeff Flake doesn't support Trump. Trump is toast. Let's face it. No, but it was one of those things where they were like, hey, he defended the Brits, and even he thinks that the British are being tyrannical. So he ends up getting elected to the Continental Congress, and he is actually one of the most vocal voices saying, let's do this. Let's declare independence. Let's fight the British. And he ends up he is actually in some sense, he might actually be the author of the Declaration of Independence.
Yeah.
What do you think, Connor? Is he?
If you look at his various writings on his thoughts on government and his Massachusetts Constitution, which we'll talk about later, because we'll talk about the Constitution for a minute, maybe. Who knows? But he has a lot of thoughts on government, and the thing is that Thomas Jefferson's a much better and more eloquent writer, but John Adams is the more eloquent and more accomplished speaker. So they work together on the the Declaration of Independence. Maybe they didn't work at the same room at the same time, but they've had many chats at that time and before then because they both respected each other. Adams did pretty much ghostwrite for Jefferson. Diane knows her stuff. A lot of those principles are quintessential Adams principles. If you take a look at his letters to Abigail, or kind of just how he holds himself.
Yeah. Well, the Declaration of Independence is what? That inalienable rights include life, liberty, and the pursuit of what?
Happiness, which he writes a lot about.
Yeah, yeah. So, it was clearly on his mind, right?
Yeah.
So, and that's one of the most famous lines. Now, Adams then goes to France, where he makes an ill-fated attempt to get some French money for the American Revolution. It doesn't work out, but Benjamin Franklin is there, and he takes care of everything. This is the beginning of the Benjamin Franklin-John Adams rivalry, because Benjamin Franklin hates John Adams. He thinks he's a total buzzkill. That's another reason I don't like John Adams, because he can't hang. He just can't hang.
But that's okay. Some people suck. And that's okay if some people suck. Sometimes I suck. And not all the times, but it's sometimes. And Ben Franklin, the mind of a generation, also fat, just like Adams. And they were both in France at the same time. And Franklin gets him yanked out. He sucks. He can't hang with Benjamin Franklin. But also Benjamin Franklin wasn't really a great ambassador and kind of sucked France off most of the time.
No, you'd be like, wow, I'm having fun with Benjamin Franklin. Then he'd take you in some room and you'd be like, oh God, what the hell is going on?
I wouldn't. I'm saying this mostly for shock value, but he would definitely be the Epstein of his time.
I don't know about that, but he definitely does hate this.
Think about it.
I'm trying not to. So Adams was he in England or Holland when the Constitution was written? He was in Europe. So he wasn't there.
It is a bummer.
Sorry, Kellen, to break the news, but Adams and Franklin were not buds. And Franklin's kids, one of his sons actually was the editor of a newspaper in Philadelphia that lambasted President Adams. He was a big Never Adams guy. So the revolution takes place. The founders emerge and take control of the situation and create the country that we continue to live in, at least on paper. And Adams, without going into too much detail because we have a lot to get through, ends up becoming the first vice president for 8 years during the George Washington administration. Now I don't want to talk too much about that because we do need to save all of that for when we talk about George Washington. But a few details that you need to know before we get into Adams' presidency is that he hated being vice president. He said, I have been given an office, the weakest office that any nation has ever contrived or ever conceived. I am vice president in this. I'm nothing. So he's very disappointed, but he does actually play a more active role as vice president than the Paul Giamatti movie would suggest. He does break some ties. But the big issue that really takes hold during the Washington administration that's going to have far-reaching consequences for the Adams administration is the revolution in France. So the United States overthrows the British Empire, founds what it calls a democratic republic. It calls itself the first democratic republic in the world. It's supposed to be a shining beacon for all of the world, this new way of doing government. And they're so excited about it. And then France has a crack at it. And holy shit, France's version of democracy is a lot more like the kind of thing that Adams associates with democracy, which is chaos, mob rule, guillotines, the whole 9 yards. What do you have to say about it, Connor?
Okay.
I'm just tired of talking. I'm trying to hand it off to you.
I mean, it's, sometimes the people got to do their thing. Sometimes people are angry. Sometimes they got to take control. Thank you for the compliment, Jeff. And sometimes you need a mix up. France is a really good example of that, and a really good example of how shitty America can be, because America decided to back England instead of France. France helped America get its independence from England, and then they sided with England against France and against the French Revolution.
Because hold on. No. Imagine if you had let's imagine you and me are brothers, and we have this really tyrannical parent. And then one day I say, you know what? Let's be independents for once. And we're going to go walk to the ice cream store and buy ice cream and eat it. And we're not going to ask permission. And then you go, let's burn down the whole house. So you're France and I'm America. Right? And then you say to me, hey, but you said we should be independent. And I say, but when I said independent, I meant do this little thing, go to the ice cream store. I didn't mean burn the whole house down, but here you are burning the whole house down, and you're expecting me to go burn the house down with you. And that's essentially what happened between the U.S. and France. The U.S. declared itself, we are democracy now and freedom. And then France was like, you want freedom? Here's freedom. And America was like,
no.
What
the only good thing?
We don't want that.
The sole, one and only good thing that comes out of America's mishandling of France is the beautiful musical or operetta Les Mis. Other than that, we wholly mishandled our allies. And ice cream would be great right now, Kwaku. Yeah.
Wait, well, but I mean, it was also a sign that the United States was not what it branded itself as, right?
No.
It wasn't really democratic. It was a much more conservative country than it appeared to be. And the emergence of the French Revolution really showed how conservative, a small c conservative, the United States was going to turn out to be. And so the French had given us money to fight our revolution, and then France had its revolution, and it was much scarier. and
we were like, nah.
Because the United States had class war too. It had guillotines, it had tarring and feathering. We had a little French Revolution ourselves, but the founders had taken control of it and created a workable system out of it. And and France wasn't happening. And George Washington was like, look, we don't want to be involved in that.
Good point.
Give him credit. He looked over at what was going on in France and he was like, we can't get sucked into that. And he was probably right that we couldn't get sucked into it. But at the same time, it was a huge hypocrisy for a country that was branding itself as the torchbearer of freedom to turn its back on a country that was going even further in the direction of freedom, right? And it's one of the reasons why this word freedom is so pointless, that we always say freedom, America is free. It just, you can't say free unless you say free to do what?
Freedom
from the word freedom out there and be like, we're free. You have to say, what are you free to do, right? And then you realize that this word freedom doesn't really have much use. So that's what happened during the Washington administration. And the United States' unwillingness to support the French created a lot of hate and resentment in France, obviously, because they supported us. So as Adams takes the reins of power as the second president, the United States is already engaged in a quasi-war with France. The French military is blowing up American ships. Yes. It is easier to be a democracy when you have an ocean between you and the Habsburgs. Absolutely. Yes, totally. And the British Empire as well.
Yeah.
So Adams takes power at a time when you have French ships blowing up American ships. You have a United States that is barely a decade old. And Adams himself, unlike his predecessor, George Washington, who was elected unanimously twice, wins the presidency by the slimmest of margins. And not only does he win the presidency by the slimmest of margins, but in Adams' day, you did not you picked a running mate, but your running mate was not automatically the vice president.
Yeah,
the vice president was whoever came in second place.
So may I ask you, Johnny, what is the point of picking your vice president if it's not a wholly elected ticket?
Because every elector got 2 votes in the Electoral College. In those days, it was a real Electoral College. Like, they were really actually had the power to choose the president. Not like today where they automatically just choose whoever they're supposed to. Like, they literally could flip. And the idea was every elector got 2 votes, and you're supposed to vote for the president, the person running for president, and then everybody but one person would vote for the vice president, the running mate.
That's so funny.
So that the first place person would be the president, and whoever came in second would be the vice president. But that's not how it worked out in 1796. In 1796, Adams won, but the second place winner was his rival, Thomas Jefferson. So literally, it's, oh my God, that is a huge cockroach on my wall right now. Anyway, oh God, that is scaring the shit out of me. Oh my God, I don't know what to do.
Don't let it come over here. You should kill it.
Okay. Can you take the reins, getting us into the whole, like, that part and the little game we devised?
Yes. Okay. So I will take over while Johnny exterminates. So let's have some fun with this, everyone. So basically, you know, how how it was. Thank you, Silver. So let's talk about this. So pretty much every early election, the vice president was the second most elected person. So if you could imagine that in today's time, or, you know, the last few elections, you know, what you think would be the most interesting duo, because, you know, the last one would be Trump and Clinton. And that would be, I don't know, quite a destructive ticket.
Oh, fuck.
We have some real action going on here. This is really entertaining. But yeah, I mean, you know, type in the chat, what do you think the most interesting, what you think the most interesting presidential and vice presidential duo? I mean, you could think about how Reagan took over from Carter. A Reagan-Carter ticket would be really interesting. Sorry, Johnny's still going. You know, we would have Clinton-Bush. Bush would have to, yeah, my co-host does need help, Kwaku. Well, Clinton took over during the time of HW, so he would have had. Are you good? All right, he would have had, you know, Bush and Clinton on the same ticket, and Clinton telling Bush, you know, everything to do. Clinton Dole would be hilarious as well, because Bob Dole was pretty.
Nobody's listening to you. They were watching.
Probably. I was doing my best to not be distracted, but I was like, I was doing a so-so job without you.
Yeah. So what were some of did the chat come up with some good pairings?
No, I was sort of distracted by what you were doing. I was doing my best to, yeah. Is the cockroach dead is the question.
Very dead. That cockroach was flying.
Really? Terrifying.
Anyway, what presidential combos do you think would be really interesting at this time with the presidential and vice presidential rule if it was the same?
Well, it would have been interesting to see Woodrow Wilson with Teddy Roosevelt as vice president because TR came in second place in 1912. TR hated Woodrow Wilson, and I'd say the feeling was mutual, but Woodrow Wilson was really more like, yeah, whatever, that guy. And Teddy Roosevelt was just like, goddamn. Obviously, Trump, Hillary.
Yeah, that would be insane.
Somebody would go to jail. Maybe both of them. Because they have a thing for each other. Anyway, then we had, come on, they're so similar.
What?
Then you have
they both want power, but other than that,
yeah,
they all want power.
What about some good? Can you think of any good first and second place?
I mean, I made fun of it.
Yeah.
What'd you say?
I think George H.W. Bush would have been a very loyal vice president to Bill Clinton.
So I was just talking about that, but I think genuinely a good one. I know we were talking about this earlier today, and you poked holes in it, but I still want to put it out to the chat, see what they think. I think Reagan as president and Jimmy Carter as vice president would have gotten a lot of things done. I think Reagan would have been a little bit more progressive, and probably actually wouldn't have been a bad ticket.
Well, it's funny because people who love Reagan, they'll just shit on Jimmy Carter all day long. But the two were very similar, actually. They made a lot of the same decisions. It's just that Reagan stepped up what Jimmy Carter was doing to 11.
People don't like being told what they're doing is wrong, and that's so funny. And they also don't like their president apologizing, and that's Jimmy Carter did both. He was like, people are going to have to maybe use less and ask for less, and that's something a very Adams idea of being less greedy and less materialistic. And Reagan was like, I want to let Americans be Americans, and you're like, that's some rhetoric bullshit. But he did get some shit done.
I also think that I mean, Herbert Hoover would have been a good vice president for Franklin Roosevelt. In fact, they almost ran. Well, Hoover and FDR they almost ran a ticket in 1920 together. There was talk of putting Hoover at the head of the 1920 ticket with FDR as VP, because Hoover was a Republican, but he hung out with Wilson, and he was very influential in the Wilson administration. And so people were like, maybe they can make a turncoat out of him and have FDR, the Assistant Secretary of the Navy, to jump in. Yeah, Reagan might have gotten fewer things done with Carter but Reagan and Carter their policies were so similar. It blows my mind that people make such a distinction between the two because their policies were very similar. They were both they were both deregulators. They were both religious right. I mean, both tax cutters. They were both, anti-liberal. Carter was anti-liberal. People don't realize that. But the liberal wing of the democracy hated Carter because he did so many conservative things. So that might have been a workable thing. But I mean, you're never going to get a better VP than George H.W. Bush. I mean, if you need a VP, he's your guy because he'll literally do and say whatever you want. I mean, Pence might be the second best choice in terms of just having somebody who will say whatever you want and make you look a little bit better by comparison. But anyway, so that was fun. Let's kind of move back into the Adams dimension now that I've killed
cockroach is dead,
the world's largest cockroach. So you have this quasi-war going on with France, and so you have the Republicans now. You have a new party kind of splitting off, this Republican Party, which believes very strongly that the United States should support the French because people like Jefferson believe that what's happening in America is something that should be happening worldwide. Think of the Bolsheviks, right? Internationalism. They're trying to see their idea of a system of government spread across the whole world. Yeah. And supporting France is key to that plan. So Jefferson is the head of the Republicans. They're called the Democratic Republicans by historians, so that as to not confuse them with today's Republicans, but we'll call them Republicans. And then you have another faction called the High Federalists. Now, this has nothing to do with 420. These are just Federalists who, under the leadership of Hamilton, these are big military, pro-British, anti-France. These are the law and order people. And Adams is actually in the middle of these two factions. He has a Republican vice president, but his entire cabinet is Hamilton loyalists, are High Federalists. So he's got these war hawk, anti-France Federalists in his cabinet, and he's got this Republican vice president, pro-France guy, Jefferson. And so in true, typical Adams fashion, he makes a decision that makes nobody happy. He doesn't go support France, and he doesn't go to war against France. He just wants to make peace.
Well, that sounds great. No option 1, no option 2. I make option 3 myself. What a great president. Let's have him again.
It was what Adams considered his greatest legacy. It was what he wanted on his tombstone. He wanted to be remembered as the man who prevented war with France.
He wanted to be the man in yellow hat.
But he came to that position over time because there was an event that took place during his presidency that nearly tipped the scales toward war. It was called the Xyz Affair. Should I talk about it?
Let's do it.
Okay, real quick. So during the Quasi-War with France, Adams sent 3 diplomats to France to try and have an audience with the French foreign minister and settle things down. It was Charles Pinckney. There's so many Pinckneys. I think it was Charles Pinckney. Elbridge Gerry, who is the originator of gerrymandering. And
that
John
fucking
Marshall.
Piece of shit.
Yeah, and John Marshall. No, Elbridge Gerry is actually pretty cool. But
gerrymandering is one of the worst.
But now it's one of the worst. It was different back then.
Fair point.
It's just the name stuck. So they go to meet the French foreign minister, and they're met by agents of the French foreign ministry who demand a $250,000 loan from the United States before they bring the diplomats to meet with the French foreign minister. So these 3 cable back to Washington saying, not cable, but write letters back to Washington saying, hey, the French are trying to bribe us. And Adams decides to, in this fever of, sort of pro-French sentiment that's going on around the country, Adams releases these letters from the diplomats showing that the French wanted the United States to bribe, or wanted a bribe from the United States in order to meet with them. And the result is an outpouring of rage towards France. And suddenly, public opinion is very strongly pushing Adams to go to war with France. So he lets he opens this Pandora's box, and he doesn't understand that by letting the public know about the XYZ affair, it was called the XYZ affair because he didn't write the names of the diplomats. He just called them X, Y, and Z. So
instead
to
of
protect
making
their
a big fuss,
identities.
It was like some Frenchman.
Right. And it caused this huge uproar. And everyone was clapping, hey, John Adams, go get him, go kill those Frenchies. And John Adams even participated in a military parade where he donned, like a general's outfit and had a big sword.
Yeah.
And strutted around like he was Mr. Military.
Yeah, I don't know if y'all saw my promotional post today and before, but there's a picture of John Adams with a sword at his side, and he has never done anything athletic or anything personally in regards to army or warfare on his own his entire life. But he paraded himself out there in a costume during his presidency.
So the country is almost brought to the brink of war, but Adams pulls the reins back. And I want to show you a clip now. We're finally getting to the clips. This is from the HBO series on John Adams. And
you show this. I'm going to pee real quick because I know what scene you're about to show.
Thanks for telling us about that.
Yeah, so that everyone knows.
All right, here we go.
Any dealings with the current illegitimate government there could well read down to our detriment. Leading us back into a war with Britain we can ill afford to wage.
What if the French, not the British, emerge victorious, Mr. Hamilton? The pretender Bonaparte is within a hair's breadth of victory over most of Europe.
In that regrettable instance, we must be prepared to take possession of valuable strategic territory before France can lay her hands on it. Let us not forget there are those in our own country, sir, who would prefer secession to our continued union. If they should be so bold as to act on their threats, in the event, say, of a French victory, we must be prepared to bring the renegades back into the fold by force if necessary.
Your actions, Mr. Hamilton, would precipitate the very thing that you pretend to protect against, the dissolution of this nation. You dream of empire, Mr. Hamilton.
You question my loyalty, sir.
Oh, no, Mr. Hamilton, I question your sanity. Now, either you are stark raving mad, or I am. Good day, sir.
Good day.
Good day.
I said good day. Yeah.
You
So
lose.
that gives you a sense of, Hamilton, wanted, he was a hawk. Don't believe
prick.
what the Hamilton musical tells you. He's
Hamilton
terrible.
is one of the worst influences as a founding father. He is a piece of shit.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So, and he tried to use the conflict with France to justify, turning the United States into a major military state. And when Adams, was very blunt towards him and called him a fool. And this actually prompted Hamilton to write a pamphlet, which was called Letter from Alexander Hamilton Concerning the Public Conduct and Character of John Adams, in which he called John Adams, ready for this familiar one, unfit for the office of president.
Let's play the clip.
And accused him of wanting to be a king. There were a lot of people who accused Adams of wanting to be a king, particularly after his next action, which was to sign a law that he did not write.
Very fair.
But it came from the High Federalists. This is so you see where Hamilton's coming from, right? You see how crazy Hamilton is. So the High Federalists, which was Hamilton's faction, and who had many of those people were in Adams' cabinet, they push the Alien and Sedition Acts. What's up, A World to Win? Welcome. They push the Alien and Sedition Acts through Congress. 4 acts aimed at mitigating the influence of France, the threat of France, from, hurting the United States. In a nutshell, they basically say that if you're, a suspicious enemy alien, you're going to be deported. And the Alien Enemies Act is actually still on the books. In fact, FDR used it to round up Japanese people during World War II. And the Sedition Act, which was declared unconstitutional, I believe, in 1964 by the Supreme Court. But now we have the Espionage Act. But the Sedition Act was, this anti-free press act because the Republican newspapers were printing all of this stuff about Adams, what a jerk, writing about, ancient ice. Yeah. See, Connor, you're sitting here defending John Adams, calling him the greatest president of all time. He was anti-immigration, anti-free speech.
Let me tell you something about one of the greatest presidents of all time. He held his own. He made sure that no one spoke bad about him, even when his good friend and vice president was paying journalists to write shit about him.
So Eugene Debs was jailed under the...
Quite a bit of people were jailed under the Sedition
I don't know, actually, if the Sedition Act had anything to do with it. It was the Espionage Act, which was passed by... It was Wilson who passed the Espionage Act, and he also passed some kind of Sedition Act.
There were people at Adams' time that there was a bunch of journalists who were jailed under Adams' time, and all of them were freed when Jefferson got into power.
Yes. But one of them was actually a congressman who, his name was Matthew Lyon, and he spoke out against Adams in the most virulent, angry terms.
He was lying, though.
And you got to remember that John Adams took over from George Washington, and George Washington had been largely shielded from negative press. Adams comes to office, and suddenly the floodgates open. And Adams was not prepared for that because, he wanted to build a society based on laws and institutions, but he couldn't handle the fact that the press was lambasting him every day. And, the Federalists, how did they, they said basically this is within the limits of the First Amendment because the First Amendment only prevents the government from passing laws to restrict free speech. It does not infringe on the right to sue somebody for libel.
Or just throw them in jail, apparently.
Well, that's what the justification was from the Federalists. They said once you've said it, you can be sued if it's wrong. And actually, the original Sedition Act did not allow truth to be used as a defense. But that was changed. So you were allowed to use truth. And, so I want to say, so Eugene Debs won a lot of votes from prison. That was actually, I believe, 1916 or 1920 when he won those votes, because in 1912, he was still a free person. But Matthew Lyon, the congressman from New Hampshire, I believe it was, he spoke out against Adams, was prosecuted under the Sedition Act, went to jail, and ran for Congress from jail and was reelected to Congress. So the Sedition Act backfired completely on Adams because it provided this avenue to sort of, do this thing where for a guy to get elected from jail, it really reflected poorly on Adams's leadership, right?
Also, another politician to be elected from jail, D.C. Mayor Marion Barry. Famous quote, "Bitch set me up," when he was caught with a prostitute and a bunch of cocaine.
Wait a minute. I thought that was Nancy Pelosi who said, "Bitch, set me up."
Nancy Pelosi has said, "Bitch, set me up" very recently.
Can okay, a little tangent. I kind of think that maybe she was set up because the salon owner was on Fox News right away. It's just very suspicious. I don't like Nancy Pelosi, but I just I watched that. I was like, it seems like a setup. But she's dumb enough, as Trump said, she was dumb enough to be set up. So maybe we should never speak of the House.
She doesn't need to be in power anymore. Get her out of here.
But Debs was not in jail in 1912. He was put in jail during World War I, it would have been 1920, I think. Anyway, so I want to play you this clip.
Let's play some Hillary and Obama.
Yeah, so this is Hillary Clinton talking about, actually, it's going to start with a quote from Jefferson, and then there's going to be a Hillary Clinton clip that's kind of analogous.
We regret to inform you, but there aren't that many video clips of Adams walking around. No one brought their iPhone to the game, right.
So this is, let's check it out. Whoops, wait, what happened? There it is.
That's just an old white dude.
There it is. No, there it is. Okay.
Now, the campaign against the Sedition Act began at the moment the bill was introduced in the House of Representatives. The alarm was sounded, of course, by Thomas Jefferson, Vice President of the United States, as well as the Republican Party's leader. If this goes...
I don't hear an echo.
It might be coming from you, or it might be coming from me. Let me put headphones on to make sure it's not coming from me.
Do people hear an echo?
It'll take a second for them to respond.
Do people hear an echo out there?
It doesn't seem like anyone's responded, so maybe it's just me. Diane says no.
All right, let's try it again.
It's just me.
All right, let's listen.
Now, the campaign against the Sedition Act began at the moment the bill was introduced in the House of Representatives. The alarm was sounded, of course, by Thomas Jefferson, Vice President of the United States, as well as the Republican Party's acknowledged leader. If this goes down, he wrote, sounds very 21st century, doesn't it? If this goes down, we shall immediately see attempted another act of Congress declaring that the president shall continue in office for life, reserving to another occasion the transfer of the succession to his heir and the establishment of the Senate for life. Jefferson, serious?
Look at this guy.
Now, after spending his entire campaign attacking one group of Americans after another, immigrants, African Americans, Latinos, women, POWs, Muslims, people with disabilities, now his final target is democracy itself.
This is John Adams, by the way.
This all started when George Washington refused to become a king, right? Now, Donald Trump probably would have called him a loser. Instead, that was one of the most important decisions any president has ever made. 8 years, it's time to move on. We fought a revolution so that we would not have a king. We would not be subjects. We would be independent citizens.
All right. So there's Hillary Clinton talking about, the best is yet to come. Yeah. So here's Hillary Clinton talking about the fear that, this is the end of democracy. This attack, of Donald Trump. And it's just to kind of show that maybe it wasn't so effective, but it was just, there wasn't a lot of video clips out there, but it was just to kind of show that the idea that someone was trying to be a king is one of the oldest fears in the United States. And, a lot of people today are afraid that Donald Trump's trying to be a king. I think that given the right circumstances, he would. But I don't know if he's going to get the right circumstances.
But Johnny,
yes.
let's talk about something. A lot of you said a lot of things against Adams that maybe the Alien Sedition Acts weren't that good. Maybe he was trying to take away people's First Amendment rights. But a lot of people like Barack Obama, right? A lot of people say, "Oh, Barack Obama's probably been the best president of the recent presidents." Well, why don't we show some sedition acts and some silencing of news reporters that Barack Obama did? Play that shit. I can't hear him.
Does it have any audio? Should have.
No,
audio.
I don't hear any audio right now.
Shit. Why did I do the whole? I didn't want to do the whole clip. All right. Let me just jump ahead and find the spot here.
No. Hillary wasn't actually talking about Adams. Hillary was talking about Trump. We were just joking around. Abigail. So speaking about to that point, while Johnny figures out the audio, Abigail was obviously a huge proponent for women's rights, and John Adams was decent at it, but not really that great. Being that he didn't get anything done for women.
Okay, you guys, you know what? Barack Obama, you're really lucky because it's not working for some reason. Let me find it actually.
I'm muted. There we go. It's a good clip.
Yeah, where is it? Okay.
Are you able to just play it?
Yeah, I am.
Play it off of YouTube, will it seize us?
Okay, I'll get it.
But yeah, let me talk about Abigail while we're doing this, just to take a nice turn. Abigail has some amazing quotes in letters to people, and let me talk about some. She said, one, if we mean to have heroes, statesmen, and philosophers, we should have learned women. So that was something basic, speaking about education that both the Adams agreed with and agreed in. And she had another thing about kings and statesmen and heroes. She said, What is the history of mighty kingdoms and nations but a detail of ravages and cruelties of the powerful over the weak? And what she's saying right here is pretty much what we are right now. As one of the strongest countries that there are, we are ravaging and cruel to a lot of the other countries, which is why we have children making shoes and children making phones and children making this and that.
I'd also like to read that, well, I won't read it, but I'll just say that Abigail said, hey, yeah, I'm really smart, and I think women should be in the room. She said, remember the ladies when you write your Declaration of Independence and Constitution. And Adam said, I think you're really smart, but I think you're, behind every great man is a great woman, and you should really do your smart stuff from home, and I'll go out and do my thing. So, Adams was not as nearly aggressive on women's rights as his wife was.
If they were around at this time, if they were 2020 people, Abigail 100% would be the politician, and John would be the lawyer behind her, the educated and very intelligent lawyer behind her. But still, she is a much better politician and more intelligent. And may I add really quickly before we play this clip, she was having correspondences with many other people at the time. Notably, Abigail was one of the people to get the innermost feelings of Thomas Jefferson in his letters. They wrote back and forth to each other, and she got a lot of information and really spoke to him a lot. And Benjamin Rush, who was not only a signer of the Declaration, but also one of the most famous physicians at the time, would also write to her and requested her opinion. And she was a really, really influential person at the time.
So getting back to the Sedition Acts, and I think we're getting to the close of the podcast here because we're going on for quite a while now. But so Adams, famous for the Sedition Acts, he was worried about the infiltration of French influence in the U.S., and he justified it, based on the idea of like protecting America's security. Years later, Adams's successor, Barack Obama, would also gain a reputation for shutting down the free press. It was a reputation that he was given a pass on because he was Mr. Hope and Change. But, as we'll see from this clip, he and John Adams actually had a lot in common when it came to freedom of the press. Let's watch.
Probe of the emails of Associated Press reporters and editors. Emails recalls President Richard Nixon's targeting of the press when it attempted to block the New York Times from publishing the Pentagon Papers, the secret history of the Vietnam War leaked to the paper by whistleblower Dan Ellsberg. This is part of the exchange.
I'd like to ask you about the Justice Department. Do you believe that the seizure of phone records from Associated Press journalists this week, or before that was announced recently this week, was an overreach? And do you still have full confidence in your Attorney General? Should we interpret yesterday's renewed interest by the White House in a media shield law as a response to that? And more broadly, how do you feel about comparisons by some of your critics of this week's scandals to those that happened under the Nixon administration?
Well, I'll let you guys engage in those comparisons, and you can go ahead and read the history, I think, and draw your own conclusions. My concern is making sure that if there's a problem in the government, that we fix it. That's my responsibility, and that's what we're going to do.
And this is White House spokesperson Jay Carney, questioned in May about the AP spying scandal and the Obama administration's prosecutions of whistleblowers.
This administration in the last 4 years has prosecuted twice as many leakers as every previous administration combined. How does that reflect balance?
I would say that the president is committed to the press's ability to pursue information, to defending the First Amendment. He is also, as a citizen and as commander-in-chief, committed to the proposition that we cannot allow classified information to be that can do harm to our national security interests or to endanger individuals to be to be leaked. And that is a balance that has to be struck.
But the record of the last 4 years does not suggest balance.
That's your opinion, Ari.
It's
But
twice as many prosecutions as all previous administrations combined. That's not even close.
I understand that there are ongoing investigations that preceded this administration. But I can tell you what the president's views are. And the president's views include his defense of the First Amendment, his belief that journalists ought to be able to pursue information in an unfettered way. And that is backed up by his support for a media shield law, both as senator and as president. And it is also true that he believes a balance needs to be struck between those goals and the need to protect classified information.
If you can respond to both.
All right.
I can't tell you. I can't tell you what he's done, but I can tell you that he respects the First Amendment.
And we'll take your word for it because he's such a great guy. John Adams, Sedition Act, I think it was like 8 prosecutions, very few deportations on the Aliens Act. Barack Obama, more people prosecuted under the Espionage Act than all presidents since its inception combined.
Times 2.
Did he say times 2?
He said
I had to
double,
mute it because I couldn't. It was echoing apparently.
He said times 2.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did y'all in the chat know about that? I don't know
Probably
if y'all
not.
knew about that.
Because I didn't know about that
Does that
until
change your-
Johnny showed me the clip.
Yeah. And I think of Barack Obama as similar to Adams in that sense, like an institutionalist, a person who believes in institutions. Yeah, I know you're going to say sounds about right, Jeff, because I know you. I know you hate Obama. That was for you, buddy. Yeah, that's what happens when you are uncritically supportive of a president. They get away with shit.
Yeah.
And Obama got away with a whole lot in terms of press freedom, for sure. Other things I liked he did, other things I didn't. But, that's something to think about. All right. So I think we're reaching the end of the program now, which brings us to our final question, our second to final question. The final question is, who are we going to talk about next time? How do you rank him, 1 to 10?
I got to say, out of all the presidents we've covered, I really respect where he's coming from. I like where he's at. I got to give Adams like a 7, maybe even an 8. I like him.
Okay.
7.5.
I like him too. I kind of like him too.
Kinda.
But God, it's a tough decision. I guess I want to give him a high marks because I like what he's thrown down, but I don't like his administrative, like how he,
New high school.
And I also I'm just more of a Jeffersonian when it comes down to it, like power to the people and all that. And that's not really what Adams is all about. So I'll give him a 5 out of 10. I'll give him 5 bags of popcorn and 2 sodas. Okay. And now the final question, what's today's date? The 4th? How about we say the 25th? Because we don't want to do it on the 18th because we have comedy potluck the next night.
Yeah.
And that's 2 weeks from now. So let's give ourselves 3 weeks to prepare for the next one on the 25th. Are you ready?
Who you got?
Ah, fuck.
Wow, really?
That wasn't how I wanted to do it. Let me try that again. There we go.
Wow. Wow.
Let's do W.
W. Let's do it. I was not ready for that, but let's do it.
Well, I feel like we had a father president. Let's do a son.
Not a bad point.
All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for coming to the John Adams discussion. We prepared a lot more than this, but the time constraints are what they are. Please join us on September 25th when Conor and I will be discussing the life and times and legacy of our 43rd president, George Walker Bush.
Let's do it.
All right, guys. Thanks. And I should say folks, right? All right, folks. Thanks for coming. We appreciate it. Thank you, Dorian Sapiens. We love you too. And God bless the world. Unless you're an atheist. Then
Okay.
bless or something. God bless the world. God bless the International. Death to imperialism. Death to corn on the cob. Okay.
Peace out.
Bye.